Welcome back to the Coptimizer Podcast. I'm excited to be here today. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while. I had a long discussion with our guest, Andy Riise, a few weeks ago, and a lot's happened since then. And you're going to understand exactly why he is the perfect guest for this show at this time. So Andy Riise is a mental toughness coach. He is a Army officer, a West Point grad, a mental skills coach, and just pretty much all around badass kind of guy. So thanks for being on the show, Andy.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pat. It's an honor to be with you, and shout out to everyone who's serving in uniform out here, protecting and serving our great communities and country.
Well, right back at you. Appreciate you and your service to our country and everything that you have sacrificed. And most importantly, thanks for your willingness to share what you've learned along the way. And, this is a critical time for law enforcement. And one of my passions, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do the Coptimizer podcast was to talk to people like you and help us in the law enforcement profession learn from others inside and outside that have valuable life experiences and professional knowledge that I think can help the profession grow. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Looking forward to the discussion. We're going to talk a lot about how to train your brain and become the best version of yourself. So should be a good discussion, because I think everybody deserves that opportunity to become the best version of themselves, and specifically our law enforcement officers who are out there.
Well, I do appreciate that. No, I got to start. I'm going to surprise you with something here, because I'm a bit of a Zoom voyeur. And anytime I get somebody on Zoom, I can't help it. I'm like, okay, what they got going on back there? And I love the flag. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. It brought me right to my cold plunge experiment that I'm doing on myself. And so if you notice me kind of, I'm a little amped up right now because it's like 9 degrees outside. I had a layer of ice in my cold plunge, and I did it like 9:25, 9:30, jumped in there. And so I'm pretty amped up, and now I've got some coffee going, and I'm fired up for this.
Well, so distraction number one is that I'm doing the same thing right now too. So I just started last week, and I don't know about you. It's been cold everywhere, especially here in the middle part of the country, and that system's moving east. So it's normally not that cold here in Southeast Texas. I live in Houston, but I just started doing the cold plunge thing too. I watched Limitless with Chris Hemsworth, our boy Thor, the other Thor, not the Thor, the author that we talked about earlier. But I was blown away. Like, I've always watched Wim Hof. I've known a little bit about the benefits of extreme temperatures on your mind and body, but then digging into that, it's amazing. So I started doing that too. So I started. So on Wednesday, I went for a run at my gym here facility in my neighborhood, and then we've got a pool and we've got a hot tub. So I've been doing. I want to see what you're doing. I did 1 minute on, 1 minute off. So 1 minute started in the hot tub, then I go 1 minute in the cold, all the way up to my head. I dunk my face at the last minute to get that parasympathetic response, and then I do that 4 to 6 times. And it was right above freezing. So 9 degrees. I don't know how you're doing that, man. But I'm curious, what are the benefits you've seen so far? Like, what's been the benefit of doing the cold plunges so far?
Well, so I'm geeking out on this too, and I have a Muse headset where I wear at night, a Muse S, where I'm tracking my brain waves while I'm sleeping. I wear a Whoop strap.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to, and you have the Oura Ring, and my wife has the Oura Ring, trying to just see, okay, what is the implications for my recovery, my HRV, and then also how is it really just kind of maybe something that's not as, I guess, maybe more subjective to me, is like, how do I feel? Mm-hmm. And last year I did cold showers. I did the Wim Hof 8-week program, download the app, did the cold showers.
Yeah.
This year I wanted to try the cold plunge, and I tell you what, they're both different. They, kind of getting to the same point, but with this, I really do feel like I mean, it's like lighting you up. Like it wakes. I mean, it's not necessarily being awake, but it's just kind of like I feel like a higher level of focus and attention, and it's lasting like for hours. It's not just like kind of you drink a cup of coffee that gets you up a little bit, and then, but yeah, it's been really interesting. The mental process that I have to go through to convince myself to go do it every day, and once you're in there for a minute. You know, that first minute, it sucks. It's cold. I mean, you can really feel the difference. Then you can kind of settle in. You get your breathing under control. You take that initial hit of adrenaline, and it gets very relaxing.
Yep.
It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'd be interested to see how your psychology changes, because you're really increasing your stress threshold. That's one of the benefits as well too. It doesn't have to be that cold for the people who are listening. I think the research suggests that anything below 70 degrees is beneficial. Like, but I think anything, it's like trying to lower that temperature down to 50 plus degrees. Right. But I think I like how you're dosing that, because that's actually a form of therapy to where you can actually increase your threshold for stress, and you can actually decrease that stress response, and increase the relaxation response, right? Which actually helps you think more clearly in stressful situations, which I know we're going to be able to talk about. It's relevant, in life, but also in law enforcement and my experience in the military.
So one thing, and again, from tracking my sleep, also in your sleep stages, you have awake, you have your REM sleep, your light sleep, and then your deep sleep.
Yeah.
And that deep sleep is really where the brain cleanses itself. In terms of Coptimizer, and why people listening might want to be interested in this, is like without going into all the science today, but it's one of the things that concerns me about police officers and being insulin resistant, and going through high levels of stress, especially when they're younger, and what the long-term implications of that are for health, health and longevity, because we do know the data is saying, high levels of blood glucose and that insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes leads to higher levels of Alzheimer's disease.
Yep, absolutely. And also the inflammation implications as well too, especially if you've, have TBI like I do, traumatic brain injury. Brain inflammation, we know, has a link to other things, right? In terms of what the hormones that your body produces naturally, right? And so, which has the long-term implications as well too. So, yeah, there's a lot of great science behind, extreme temperature immersion, like saunas. I don't know if you've done sauna too. That's something I want to do.
That's next,
That's the next venture too. But I think all those things are really good because, again, they're evidence-based. They're not just this hokey kind of faddish type thing, like the 5-finger toes shoes that people were wearing for a long time. But it's something that actually, and I experimented with it too. I'm always one of those people that, and I'm making fun of myself because, I did the minimalist thing, and there's still a lot of people who are really, and again, it was a misinterpretation of what the science is and the cult following behind Born to Run and all that other stuff too, right? But it's finding the right blend of like the faddish cool thing to do versus something that's actually that we believe has a lot of good health, wellness, and performance benefits for you.
Yeah. And quick story on that. And this is my caution to people, like, because I'm kind of one of those knuckleheads where I see something, I'm like, all right, I'll try it. I'll do that. So I bought my first pair of Vibram 5-finger shoes. This was early, fairly early on in my CrossFit days. And it says when you wear these shoes, if you're, and I have, my wife makes fun of me all the time because like, I'm one of these people, if like I walk in shells on the beach, I'm like, she walks everywhere barefoot. And take it easy. Don't try to do everything at once on day one. So what did I do? I'm like, that's for a run. That's for everybody. I went down to the track and did 400 intervals. And so I ran a 400, walked a 400, and I was in my second 400 where I was probably about 200 meters in, and both of my calves at the same time they just started tightening, and then I started to slow down, and then just went, and they locked. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I was laying on the fence trying to stretch my calves out. I think people driving by were probably like, what the hell is that guy doing out there? But I was like, okay, lesson learned. Don't do that. So I took it easy from there.
Yeah, steady dosing. The slow drip campaign is for everything in moderation, right? But I did the same thing. I had those when I was in 7th Special Forces group, and I was really getting into. I just got done teaching at West Point, and I was working. They were developing this whole tactical athlete program. It's called Thor 3. I won't get into what that means, but basically treating Green Berets like they're elite tactical athletes, and obviously they get in their service as special forces later in their career. Like the average Green Beret is like 31. So I was a support soldier, but I was obviously really into the psychology of human performance and exercise psychology. And so I almost served as like a pseudo mental skills coach for them because we didn't have a contracted mental performance coach. But at the time I was the 4th person assigned, and we were building a brand new special forces unit because at the time, we were trying to meet the demand of fighting 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so they were building 4ths of everything across the military. So they were adding SEAL teams, they were adding 4th battalions of special forces units. So I was literally standing up a brand new special forces unit. And again, they were adopting this new program. Well, they had just moved from Fort Bragg to where they had been for 50 years to Eglin Air Force Base in Northwest Florida, where I was stationed. Not a bad place to be, by the way. But the compound was still being built. Like, so our headquarters was still being built. So we were like in a language lab, and there's only 4 of us. And so, we didn't have any equipment. We didn't have many people. So we physically trained our butts off. Right. And what was cool is that 2 of the senior leaders that were part of us that I later went to this program went to the Andrews Institute, which is now called Exos. And they learned from some of the best strength and conditioning coaches, the same people who train NFL athletes and Olympic athletes for the combine and for the Olympic Games. They were coming back, and now we're working with strength coaches and nutritionists and physical therapists, all this stuff too. And I was helping us train our brains. But it was interesting, like, again, this whole thing, we were experimenting with like doing gait analysis on running, and my buddy Brian Martin was really into a really good runner himself too. So we started messing around with the 0 drop shoes. Like I got Ultras, ALTRAs, the 0 drop shoe with the wide toe. I think I got like them when they were a Kickstarter campaign, and they were ugly as hell because they were
orange. I remember them.
Yeah, these were like gray, but they just were ugly, right? There's something like, look like something you get at Walmart or something like that, right? And so, but yeah, I tried to do the really minimalist ones, and because we had a discount and a deal with New Balance, so the really minimalist New Balance ones too. And I did the same thing, man. And I'm a big dude. I mean, I think it was active duty. I'm 6'1". I was always around 225 and 230. And so I'm a bigger dude now. I'm obviously gained weight and trying to get back down to my fighting shape, but it just was hard on my knees. And I think it really helped me with my gait and my efficiency as a runner. But then I started developing like patellofemoral issues because of it. And so jumping out of airplanes may have contributed to that as well too. But yeah, I quickly moved back away from that, and I started doing. I went the opposite way. I call them maximalist shoes. So I started getting the thickest ultras that there are, in order to be able to. And I stopped running, multiple times a day. But yeah, it was. I do think there was benefits to it, but I think when you're done poorly in extremis or not done properly, just like anything, it can really hurt you instead of help you.
Yeah. And, building up to it. And I do. So I know Mark Sisson talked a lot about it too. And Brian McKenzie, he did a lot of the endurance training, particularly early on in the CrossFit days, but just talking about having the right gait, the right stride, but having the cushion in the shoe actually kind of tricks your, it delays the response from the nerve endings in the bottom of your feet up into, so like your body has natural shock absorbing mechanisms built in. And the theory was that, and again, this is just high level, and I apologize to anyone out there that's got a high level of understanding on this. I don't want to misquote anything, but wearing the cushion in the shoe can actually delay that signal, which can ultimately put more pressure on the knee, the ankle, the knee, and the hip, which can, over the long term, for people that are endurance runners and long distance runners, that can cause problems later in life. So the theory being, hey, you learn to run barefoot, kind of like born, they talk about, and born to run, then you build a higher level of endurance. But anyway, so you kind of skipped over some stuff. Maybe we could, I'm just going to ask you to go backwards just a tad and maybe just give us a little bit about your background, because we got right into it. And you're from Texas, right?
No, I'm actually originally I live in Texas. I'm in Houston. So my wife is a Texan, and so I'm originally from Northern California. And I went to West Point as a recruited athlete to play football. I went to West Point via a prep school, which at the time was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. That's now co-located at West Point. And that was a preparatory year where you played junior college level football and sports. So half of them are recruited athletes coming out of high school usually, and half of them are soldiers who are enlisted, who are, coming out of the military and going into West Point. And it's designed to prepare you. And so with your math and your English skills, and I was really struggling with my mathematics, barely got into West Point, struggled at West Point academically, and just it's a 47-month crucible that's really designed to challenge you in a lot of different ways. And it certainly did that. And so I found a unique center called the Center for Enhanced Performance. After my coach referred me there, I switched positions I was an offensive player, I was a fullback. For those of you who know what that is, kind of a dying breed in professional football and college football. But at the time, there's no other place you'd want to go as a fullback. You're the first option and the triple option, and you got the ball a lot. But I really thrived. It was actually part of my identity as an athlete, and again, being a really physically tough guy was part of my MO. I thought I was mentally tough until, I switched positions, and now I'm in my hardest year academically, was struggling. So my coach at the time referred me to this unique center called the Center for Enhanced Performance. And a lot of people don't know this, but in 1989, this is where sport and performance psychology, which has been around, since the turn of the century, but has really was been only with elite populations, like elite sports and Olympics, and even very limited in those populations. But it was kind of in the shadows. And I think it's kind of in line with everything having to do with psychology, and the word mental had a lot of stigma with it. Obviously, when we were coming up with our time in uniform, this was no different, but this was like a regular student support center, but they provided mental skills training based on educational psychology and sport and performance psychology. And it's designed to help you both, perform on the field, and everybody's an athlete there. Everybody has a physical training requirement you have to go through, so if you're not a Division 1A athlete like I was, then you're playing intramurals, and then everybody has physical requirements all 4 years in order to be able to graduate as part of your grade. And then of course it's an Ivy League type education, and long hours in school, taking way more credits than a normal student athlete does. And then I'm doing a full-time job on top of it, to where I'm on playing big time college football and everything that goes along with that business of football too. So I was just really drowning in my requirements. And I worked with an Army officer who just got his master's degree from the University of Virginia. His name's Carl Olson. Shout out to him. And, he taught me about that your attitude's a choice, that how to build confidence despite setbacks, how to control my attention and my energy, and how to develop a goal orientation and how to tap into my motivational systems, how to overcome challenge, change, and adversity, which as to be more resilient and gritty. And at the time, I didn't realize that these skills were making a big impact, and they definitely helped. But I was in this survival mode state. And so when I graduated, I just was happy to be done and to move on to my career. But then 9/11 happened, and just everything, the way that we changed in terms of fighting an asymmetric fight. So we'd been fighting linear warfare since we were fighting the previous war in Desert Storm, which my sister and brother-in-law were in. And we had overwhelming firepower and maneuver, and we could just roll over any army in the nation. But as soon as we did the initial sprint to Baghdad in 2003, I'm a 25-year-old officer leading 30 men in combat for the first time. There wasn't a lot of people who had been to combat, so a lot of that institutional knowledge was now gone. But this is a different type of fight, because now the enemy was not going to fight toe to toe with us. They're going to, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. So they're going to attempt to, hide amongst the people. They're going to hit us with roadside bombs because we didn't have very good armor at the time. They were going to hit us with sniper fire. And they were using this network to defeat, an overwhelming force that we were, and forced us to fight in a way that we weren't trained and prepared for. And so I think that's when the aha moment for me was when I came home and I reflected on that experience. I thought about this idea of how do you train your mind, your body, your team, your character, your craft, this holistic approach to being a warrior that my boss and mentor, Colonel Chuck Rogerston, had been talking to me about. But I knew how to bring that mental side into myself, but I didn't know how to train it to my soldiers. But when I thought back on my experience, it was, we were socially connected and cohesive, so we were definitely a brotherhood, and there was only men in artillery at that time. We were physically fit to fight, relatively speaking. Technically and tactically, we were competent, to do our jobs, to shoot, move, and communicate. But the thing that really allowed us to adapt and overcome was our mental toughness. And so, again, it kind of became this question, this hypothesis that I had in my mind, like, okay, well, how do I train myself and train others as a leader? And so that really stuck with me. And then after my second deployment, which was really difficult, I was training, advising, and assisting, living and fighting with the Iraqi army up in Mosul, Iraq in 2008, up at the Syrian border. Very difficult assignment. We didn't have enough special forces soldiers that's their core mission, to do that mission. So they were, throwing regular army soldiers like myself in 12-person teams and then deploying us to try to stand the indigenous forces up so then we can, build their competence and capacity so then we could come home. In other words, work ourselves out of a job. And that's only relevant because I think that's my first foray into my first entrance into coaching, and I call that combat coaching. Yeah. And then I was 10 years in. I was going to get out of the Army. I'd missed the birth of my second son, who I watched live via satellite. That's a whole other story. But my wife was, obviously very burned out. This is an endless cycle of war. We were losing the war at the time. And so I was going to get out of the Army and move on. And so we got this opportunity out of nowhere. There was a good friend of mine named Doug Chadwick sent an email out to the Army Football Network via email asking if anybody wanted to come back to teach at West Point. And normally there's an advanced degree, a master's degree tied to that. You actually go to school for 2 years and you go back to teach in that discipline. This had nothing like that attached to it. However, I wasn't interested in that because you have an active duty service obligation. So basically, for every 2 years you go to school, you owe 1 year to the Army. So the Army's going to get their pound of flesh out of you. I didn't want that. I just wanted to go back, pull off on the roadside of life, pull out the map and compass, and then, figure out what the next move was. And really the goal was to transition out of the Army from West Point. And then kind of bring back, help teach cadets that were struggling like me. Because what the academies tend to focus on, the air quotes, good cadets, but the cadets who are really struggling, although we want to make sure that they succeed, and it's the whole no cadet left behind type model, I guess. There wasn't really focusing on helping really pour into these people that we knew could be really great officers. And I had gone through that myself. So the CEP, Center for Enhanced Performance, was something that I wanted to be a part of because they meant so much to me in my journey. And that was a really interesting time because at the Army, where there was more soldiers killing themselves on the battlefield, more soldiers killing themselves at home than were on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan. So our nation's leadership looked to the Army leadership and said, we need to do something about it. So they brought together the best minds from academia, from existing military programs and other best practices. And they formed this task force. And I got voluntold to go down to the University of Pennsylvania to be a part of this. And you literally have the highest ranking Army officer in the room. And I'm sitting with these PhDs and colonels and generals, and kind of like one of these kids is not like the other. And once they found out that once they found out that I was, I didn't even have a master's degree, like I said. So once they found out that I had recent combat experience, then they were like, hey, sit down. You got a place at the table here. We need you to be the sanity check. So I spent the next 6 months, taking this from the University of Pennsylvania Resilience Program based on Martin Seligman, Karen Rivage's work on positive psychology and developing resilience, which is the ability and willingness to bounce back from adversity. We were taking that curriculum that was otherwise not really proven with tactical populations, but had a lot of efficacy with 5th and 6th grade teachers. So teaching teachers how to teach it to their kids on how to be more resilient. We translated that to soldiers ended up becoming one of the Army's first master resilience trainers and developing and facilitators. And then I was also deploying all over, not deploying, but going on mobile training teams all over the country, because a lot of graduates like me who had experienced this mental training came to the same conclusion, and now we're demanding this type of training. So we create these mobile training teams to go out and fill those gaps, and we start creating these other sites. There was only 6 at the time. And when the first one was with the Special Warfare Center and School at Fort Bragg, where they train Green Berets and Special Operations Forces. And they were really early adopters, as they are with a lot of different things. And so I started working with that community and thought that, I wanted to be a part of it. It seemed like a really good cultural fit. And then I got my opportunity, which I mentioned before, with the 7th Special Forces Group. So my day job was really to help jump out of airplanes and help Green Berets put warheads on enemy foreheads. And I did that, and I was good, but I had this other skill set. Yeah, I had this other skill set which is helping Green Berets train their brains. And like I said, they were really into that. They were probably more open to that than even the regular Army at that time. And so I'm 10 to 12 years in, and now it's like, hey, I have this. I love teaching. I love teaching the mental game. But there's no path to do that in the Army and still advance, right? And you can appreciate that, and folks who are there too. It's like, hey, how do I have range and develop multiple skills that contribute to my main profession? But how do I sharpen the sword in this other field that I love, knowing that this may be something I want to do when I grow up? And so I did that. It wasn't very popular, wasn't very common. I ended up side hustling with a consulting company that good friend of mine that I wrote the book with will talk about. It was really bringing together the best practices from special operations in the military from a leadership perspective, and also, bringing that perspective back to professional sports in the corporate world. And that was still new at the time. Now it's seems like every Navy SEAL's out there, with a book and a podcast and working with corporate people, doing log PT on the beach or rucking somewhere. But at the time, this was new. And so our first client was the New York Jets. Had an amazing experience, and really the aha moment for us was when we went through an exercise. The most popular thing that we did was really testing their mental agility, if you will, their psychological flexibility, decision making, and that type of assessment was in these really kind of gray scenarios out on Woody Johnson's farm. They found one of the heirs to the Johnson & Johnson family, who owns the Jets, has this amazing horse farm where we did this multiple day team building event, and we learned a lot from it too. But they really made a pivot towards really focusing on mental toughness. I had the ability to do that, and so I did that for quite a few years for the rest of my Army career. And what I found was that me working with those other populations gave me a perspective that I could bring those best practices back to what I was doing as an Army officer. So and what I was doing in the military was helping with that piece too. So they really benefited each other. It was not easy to do. I went back, got my master's degree, while I'm deploying to Afghanistan. And meanwhile, I'm married. I got 4 kids. My wife is absolutely amazing and sacrificed a lot, as every spouse that supports somebody in uniform understands what I'm talking about. So thank you.
They sure do. Yep.
Yeah. And then, and I'll wrap it up to make the long story longer here. And I'm telling my whole life story here, but
no, I think people are getting a really good idea of why your message is going to be so relevant and so powerful for our police officers.
Yeah. And so just to wrap it up, so finished my career, taught at Air Force Academy. I got a chance to be basically a department head at the Maneuver Center, where we teach infantry and armor soldiers. And then when I retired in the middle of the pandemic, I really just wanted to find a job. And I was lucky that I spent 2020, albeit it was during the pandemic year, and it was all remote because the season was so limited. I was with the Rockies. So you remember that email that was sent, that same officer had retired before me and was with the Rockies. He still is, Dr. Doug Chadwick. And so he brought me on as an intern. And then they weren't hiring because they're a small market club. A lot of people lost money that year and everywhere. And so I was hired by the Reds. And so I was their first minor league mental skills coach. And I did that for a year. But I spent a lot of time away from my family, decided I wanted to defeat the purpose why I retired. And so, and I never wanted to do anything more than 20 anyways. My oldest son, who'd been moving every 2 years, he was going into high school. And that was always the goal, was to get him in a 4-year stable position. And so we did. And so But now I was gone. I spent the whole summer away from my family, and I spent my entire 20-year career, if I wasn't deployed, I was, always gone, somewhere in the world training, or going to school. So, came back home and I worked for the Department of Defense at Texas A&M University. I really, again, and part of my job there was from a human performance perspective, was helping, work with businesses and doing the research to help us with the human weapon system, right? So how do we, make tactical athletes, again, how do we use existing technology or emerging technology and research to make our athletes, healthier, improve their well-being in that uniform, and increase their performance, in and out of duty. And so just being on the cutting edge of that thing was really, really interesting to me from the technology and what's next type of stuff too. But it was very strategic in nature, and I miss coaching. And so I went out on my own to start Design to Perform. And we're, a coaching and consulting company. We focus on the 4 C's of mental toughness, which we'll get into. And our mission is to help leaders and teams, become the best version of themselves by developing the mental strength to win from the inside out. And so we're not on the mental health spectrum, but we obviously, work across the health, wellness, and performance spectrum of psychology. We work with, right now, we work with athletes, specifically coaches, parents, and players from the youth level all the way up to the pro level. We work with businesses of all sizes and shapes, to include nonprofits, work with healthcare professionals, especially those who deal with trauma. And then finally, I deal with law enforcement officers, which we'll get into. So those are the 4 market segments. But really who I am is just a servant leader who's trying to continue to serve beyond the uniform. And, I want to help people, get the most out of what they have to be at their best of their matters most. And I think that that our law enforcement officers who are out there need this more than anything. And that's why I'm so passionate to talk about that with you today, Patrick.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that, because, you hit on a few things, and I'm going to go back just to touch on one of them. And, one of the tragedies of being at war for 20 years is the human toll that it takes, right? It's tragic. It's tragic when you lose somebody in combat, but then I think, there's a different type of tragedy when you lose someone to suicide. And a lot of people in America don't realize how high the suicide rates are for our law enforcement officers. Yeah. It's on par with the same rate as those that have been serving in combat. And of course, we have a lot of veterans do transition and work in policing. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot there that we could eventually touch on about, why, what you learned in doing your resiliency training at the University of Pennsylvania, and why that same type of approach could be used and beneficial to police officers.
Yeah. I think it's all about getting left a bang, right? So from my perspective, one of my visions is to democratize mental skills training. So in other words, how do we get, it's not just reserved for elite populations like professional baseball players that I work with, or executives, like you see a lot of executive coaching. We need to get this training education in the hands of people, our youth, because the post-pandemic era has really exposed the ugly underbelly of our inability to cope with stress. That's why we see burnout as such a prevalent thing, especially in law enforcement. And so if you don't have the ability to, if you don't have the mental body armor to withstand stress and see challenges as opportunities, that's a skill set. And so if you don't have that built into how you think and how you feel and how it affects how you behave and ultimately perform, then you're really susceptible to psychological illness and injury that could lead to, something like psychological ideation, or even attempts, or even taking your own life, right? And so it's something that, like, I think law enforcement does not have built into our current training education, my expertise. And again, it's not about me and my expertise, but how, it's so important that we train our minds, just like we train our bodies, our team, our character, and our craft. But I'd be willing to bet you, if you're out there and you're, depending on your position, whether you're a retired cop or you're a cop that's out there right now, you're a sheriff, you're a constable, whatever you're doing right now, I want you to ask yourself, out of those 5 things that I just mentioned, how much time do you spend training your craft, right? working with technology and all those hard skills and all those tactics and techniques and strategies, incredibly important. Again, how much time do you spend on your team where we're recruiting and retention? But again, are those the most important things in extremists, right? I would argue probably everybody I talk to, 60 to 70% or more of their game, if they were to add it, talk about mental versus physical alone, would say the mental aspect of policing is arguably the most important. But then I ask, how much time do you spend actually doing that? And, it's like 0, 10, and the reason why is it's not their fault. What I do is not mainstream. Okay. Like you're hearing, it's becoming mainstream. It's why you're hearing things about mindfulness and meditation and all these other things that we're talking about. Yep. That can sometimes seem kind of pseudoscience and faddish, right? But there's a whole gamut. There's a whole, think about going to a strength and conditioning coach for your brain who also can help you prevent you from, from getting injured and ill psychologically and build that mental body armor, to really, how do you deliberately, intentionally build the warrior mindset and the guardian's heart? There's an art and science to that. It's something you and Eric talked about too. And that's what I do. And I'm passionate, and I will tell you, people don't scale, the products do. And so I'm on a mission to help get, again, I'm not trying to sell something, but it's about getting the information that's actionable, that can turn into practices and habits that help prevent the things that are happening, like in Memphis. You can't always prevent those things that what happens there or with George Floyd or in Ferguson, Missouri. But if you can increase the probability that bad things aren't going to happen by controlling how you think, man, that's a game changer.
Yeah. So the first sign of somebody struggling, or the first sign that there might be a problem, sadly, in our profession in law enforcement, is generally when somebody has done something that's going to end their career.
Yeah.
And in the worst cases, somebody's getting injured or killed as a result of poor performance that is a downstream side effect of really things that are happening upstream. And so I love this concept. I love this idea. It's one of the things that I'm super passionate about, is trying to really just hopefully get to people to, and particularly law enforcement leaders, to think about this. Like, I mean, not just give it a cursory glance, but sit down and think about it. Because if you've ever read The Art of War, right? Sun Tzu, it's one of the oldest publications about war and the warrior that's ever been written. And, right. And one of the basic principles of that book is, right, win the battle before the war ever starts, right? And that really, what he's talking about is you have to develop yourself first. You have to prepare yourself, so when you are placed in that situation, you're going to be at your best.
Yeah, I say leadership and policing and performance are ultimately not about you, but it starts with you. It really does, and I will just say that, like, we're not very good about training ourselves first. And we don't train our minds, not because we don't think it's important. Like, I think that our generation, the people who are in the police force wearing the uniform right now, whether it's in the military or you're a first responder, they understand how important it is. They just don't have the resources and the access to it. And they don't know how to incorporate it into what they already do. And so I think that's really important, is that mental training is best done, if you're out there and you're looking to do it, best done when it's woven into something you're already doing it. So I'm learning about imagery, self-talk, goal pursuit, motivation, all these things that are, involve self-awareness, self-regulation, influence, and, situational awareness. Those are really, I call the 4 competencies. Those are emotional quotient or emotional intelligence competencies, which are really the competencies of the warrior. When you think about it, if you can teach those, don't sit in a PowerPoint in a classroom, get it the hell out of that as soon as possible and weave it into your tactical training, right? Weave it into your technical training, debrief things when you're on patrol or when you're getting off duty for the night too, to where I'm incorporating and reviewing as part of my process and procedures how I think and how that's affecting how I perform, not just the things that are so-called, hard skills that I can measure and they're quantifiable, right? But the reality is that's the other piece too, is that we have the ability to actually measure mental toughness, and we can get into that. But that's part of what I do through my partnership with AQR International and the 4C model.
Yeah, that's fascinating because since Daniel Goleman's book came out, I think I read that in the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe it's early 2000s. It just incredibly interesting. And there's training in law enforcement now on emotional intelligence, and really there's a lot of discussion now about how is there a way, and I've had these discussions with a friend of mine who's a professor at Purdue. Is there any way for us to try to screen for higher levels of emotional intelligence when you're bringing in applicants?
Right.
And why we want the best candidates that we can get, but we also want people that are going to be able to, have that resilience when they're faced with a lot of adversity. Because in policing, you're going to be faced with a lot of trauma, a lot of physical trauma, a lot of emotional trauma. It's unavoidable.
That's right.
So it's the old way was suck it up.
Suck up and drive on. Sleep when you die. Absolutely. Don't talk about my feelings. If I go see a psychologist, it's going to ruin my career. I think that's what people in uniform share in common, and any uniform for that matter. I'll say that's not unique to that. And those are some of the commonalities. And what's interesting too is I know that recruiting numbers are down. Retention is difficult as well too. So let's say so you're talking about the top end of the funnel, but once we get them in, then how do we also assess them? I'll take, for example, the 4 C's of mental toughness, which are control, commitment, challenge, and confidence, right? And everybody falls under a spectrum in each one of those factors, which have 2 sub-factors. And we'll share the model up here as well, too, that people can learn more about this. But we all fall into the spectrum of being mentally tough on the front end. So let's say it's a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really mentally tough, right? And then 1 being mentally sensitive, right? Well, we automatically, when we hear those words, we think mental toughness equals good, mental sensitivity equals bad. The reality is every single one of us is mentally sensitive in one or more areas. And what I say, and hopefully I can turn this into a TED Talk later this year, is mental sensitivity can actually be a superpower, and mental toughness can be a shadow vulnerability. Right? Because, and here's why. Let's take emotional control using the emotional intelligence idea. If you rate like a 5 or 4 or 5, in emotional control, you may have like a temper, or you may be just really sensitive to feedback and criticism. You're a perfectionist, so this is you. There's a strength associated with that. You may be really empathetic. Like you're really aware of how other people think and feel. You're one of those people who can walk into a room and you can pick up on body language really easy. And so how do I bring that strength to bear? So yes, part of it is screening out the people who maybe, are going to be susceptible to the overwhelming stress and pressure it is to be in law enforcement. Totally agree with that. We don't have that luxury right now because numbers are so down. And it's the same thing in the military. Our numbers are down. Okay. So, but now I've got them. Now, how do I better understand my individual officer? How do I better understand them? That's what our leaders need to do. I don't know if we're doing that, because I think we're doing the best that we can with what we have, but are we really getting scientific with how we understand our individual police officer and how they act and react in certain situations, right? What do you think, Pat?
I think the answer is a resounding no. I think there is an awareness that's building about why this is important, and I think there are small pockets of it sadly, I think some of these pockets have been around for a while. So some of these concepts we've been talking about for 15, 20 years, it's just it's very, very difficult to it's Machiavellian in the law enforcement space, right? It's trying to introduce these new things
Right.
you really, you run into a lot of friction in a lot of different ways. There's political friction from, hey, is this something that I can bring to my community? You have resistance at the administrative level where your commanders don't even agree about what's the most important thing. You have resistance from the line level. Um, how and why is this important to me? And so I think we just, as leaders, and this was, I think about this a lot now that I'm retired. Like, it's, now you actually, it's kind of like that opportunity to, decompress, and
Yeah.
then, kind of take a big step back,
Yeah.
not like the tactical pause, not the tactical step back, take a look around, uh, but like, really think about, what are we doing well in law enforcement? What do we need to work on? Quite frankly, if I could go back, what would I do differently?
Yeah.
Are there things I would do differently?
Yeah.
Yeah. So communication, right? It always boils down to, what are you trying to get done?
Yeah.
And how effective are you at communicating that across all levels of the organization,
Yeah.
and making sure everybody is getting the same message? And that, I think,
Yeah.
that's where we struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll say it too. Like, you're going to hear my story, which my story is part of the reason why I tell it the way I do. It's actually part of human performance history in the U.S. military, right? And so I had a friend, oh, you're a pioneer in that. I don't think I'm a pioneer in it, but I certainly was a lab rat who was, facilitating the experimentation of what this could look like. And then when I went back, and we're the graybeards in both our professions, right? We're the retired guys who've, we have institutional knowledge, and we're trying to influence the next generation of war fighters and police officers, right? So how do we do that, right? Well, I think some of it is actually sharing the lessons learned about what works and what doesn't work, and if I can, I want to share, if you're a leader out there, if you're a police chief and you're someone who's thinking about if you really want to invest in the human dimension, which I think you think across the board, I would say the military and law enforcement are the same in that we talk a good game about investing in our people, but then when it comes to our dollars and our time and energy, we fall short every single time, and I got really frustrated with that. And in defense and national security, just like, homeland security or community security and policing, it's focusing on the hardware and the technology. We're enamored with it, and we invest so much money. Same thing in athletics. I've got youth athletes who their parents are going to spend $300 on a bat, but they don't want to spend $100 an hour on training, helping their kids train their minds. And it actually baffles my mind, and part of that is because we don't understand the return on the investment yet.
Yes.
Because again, we're not being scientific about it. But a cautionary tale, I would say, if you're, again, a leader who's looking to implement this type of training, call it what you want: mental skills training, resilience training, grit, whatever you want to call it. But in other words, we're training our minds. Is that making it mandatory and shoving it down people's throats is not going to work. We tried that in the Army, and it failed miserably. If you are doing something and you're not piloting it and getting feedback from your officers and letting them give you the opportunity to tell you what works and what doesn't work, you're wasting your time and money, right? And so beta testing this and getting feedback and letting it become a top-down and a bottom-up driven program, that's the way to go. And I think that's the way special operations did it. And again, they don't have it all figured out either, because everybody is struggling with scalability, right? You have to have in-person application, and you also have to have the digital reinforcement. And it can actually go both ways in terms of capturing your audience, right? Because there just isn't enough mental skills trainers out there to meet the million people in blue, right? There's a million warfighters in uniform in the Army, for example, too. So you literally, how do you scale a 1,000,000-man police force, right? You can't do it with coaches. You can't. I mean, we're just not there yet, right? My field is as popular as it's ever been. Coaching is becoming really popular, period. And hats off to Axon Coaching and the other programs are trying to develop that as well too. But you got to have the right combination of in-person engagement, application. And so basically, in other words, education and application. in the real world. And you also have got to be able to have a combination of in-person and digital training to meet your people where they're at, right? So those are just some of the things that we learned as we rolled out the comprehensive soldier fitness program, the holistic health and fitness program that I was a part of, Thor 3 in special forces. And if anybody, you're going to get please reach out to me, because I'd love to be able to get into details about some of those best practices, because even in the Army, we didn't do that. We failed miserably at so many things at the comprehensive soldier fitness program. But then when the holistic health and fitness program came on, which was ran by a different, the institutional side of the Army, they didn't borrow the best practices and learn from their mistakes, right? And so now we're repeating the same mistakes over and over again, which is, again, costing us time and money, and it's at the detriment of the warfighter, right? So those are some cautionary tales and lessons learned I thought I'd share.
I'm taking a few notes here. And I think there's some things we can discuss about maybe how do we get some of those things done. But I did want to spend a couple minutes, maybe digging into the 4 C's and kind of and maybe maybe as just kind of an exercise, let's use this most recent example,
right,
of police tragedy that's on display for the world to see right now. And I want just a caveat up front. We're talking about the arrest situation in Memphis, that led to the fatality of a. You don't want to call him a suspect, because he was just an individual that was getting ready, being pulled over. But I say this, I always have a caveat, because I as a police leader, as a police chief, I've been through the ringer a few times. When there's always a fine line when you're trying to balance the protect an investigation to ensure that if in particular, if it's something that's going to lead to a criminal prosecution, whether it's a civilian or or an officer, you have to protect the process. Otherwise, you jeopardize potentially your entire case if the wrong information gets out. But with all that being said, anyone can watch a video and come to some pretty good conclusions about what actually happened. And so there's always that caveat. So it's like I think in all these things there's always information that kind of leaks out and creeps out, and then eventually 6-12 months down the road we get a full comprehensive understanding of what happened, detailed information about who knew what when, what occurred what when. So with all that being said, I've got the saying that sometimes if one officer isn't bad enough, 2 can make it worse. Yeah. And if 2 is worse, then 4 can be catastrophic.
Right.
If in that you don't have the emotional control, the emotional regulation, yep, for being able to fight through the stress in the moment. And I'm sure in combat, I've never been in combat, so I don't want to speak to combat. I've been in fights, I've been in foot pursuits, I've been in car chases. So been in all of those things, and it is very, very easy to get pulled in to the emotion of the moment. And when you're a young officer, one of the things you don't appreciate it in the moment, but one of the things that you learn to value quickly is having the experienced officers around you that have been there, that have done that have that institutional knowledge, that can recognize quickly, it's time to pull back. And that's kind of the whole purpose of what we call our FTO programs, our field training officer programs, right? Dosing officers appropriately, stressing them appropriately, but not too much, and being there, having a safety net for them. All that being said, some poor performance on display. It raises a lot of questions about training. Yep. How well were these officers prepared? It raises a lot of questions about frontline supervision, span of control. yeah, and we could go on and on. But from I just with all those caveats,
Right.
you coming with your background and your experience and
Right.
your expertise in coaching this,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you saw, and what are some of the things that concern you?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is like a classic, like escalation of force type situation. Um, and there's a lot of stimulus, and there's a response by one or more police officers, right? In this situation. And we don't know everything that went on. And I think to be able to say, so we're trying to be as neutral as possible. So I want everybody who's listening to this, practice your objective neutral mindset to where, whether, depending on where you're at on the political spectrum, that's not what this is about. This is just about understanding the stimulus and the response, what happened. And then we're trying to analyze the human behavior at an individual and collective level, right? And how do we learn from the situation, right? Because it's that we don't learn from this, then this is going to continue to repeat itself. So I think to start with the 4C model, my version that I use of this actually at the center of it, I think this is critically important towards our training and education, our development of our young officers, has to do with character. And character is a combination of several things. One of them is your values. Those are the principles that are at the core of your identity. Your core of your identity as a servant, as a human being, and as a police officer, right? And so regardless of where you're at in your development journey, right? And so the other piece of that is your purpose. Why do you do what you do? Why did you raise your right hand and decide that you want to protect and serve your community? Why is it that beyond the uniform, you do what you do when you wake up every single day? And why should anybody care? The next thing has to do with beliefs, which purpose and beliefs are the lens in which you see yourself and you see others in the different situations. Beliefs have an incredibly important and are powerful. And all those things, again, are about answering the question, who am I? Who am I as a human being and who am I as a police officer? Because they're really not one another the same. So who you are at home is what is eventually going to influence how you are on the beat on the street. We're back in the same. Yeah.
Let me jump in real quick on there, because I want to start with that. So at the core, you're talking about character and strengths. Character. Is character, because this is something when we're hiring police applicants, we go through a very extensive process where you get a physical fitness test, you're taking an aptitude test. If you make it past that, then we do a very comprehensive background investigation, and those, character is one of the things that we're evaluating for.
Yeah, right.
And all the way up into including a polygraph. So when we're talking about character, do you believe that character is once you reach the age of 21 to 25, they say that the male brain is still developing at that point. Is character set, or is character something that's malleable that we can train, that we can fix, that we can build upon?
Yeah. So a little bit of both. So a lot of that is baked into our personality, which is part of our DNA, and that's passed on from generations. So some of it is that we're born with, but the overwhelming amount of our character, which includes those elements that I'm talking about, that affects our moral and ethical compass and decision making, that's related to that. That's the so what, is our learned behaviors. They're shaped by not by nature, but by nurture, right? So in other words, you can actually train character. So you can select for certain traits and weed out for that as well too. But the good news is that while we're in uniform, just like we do in the military, is that we're actually training character. We do a shitty job at actually in the Army that I can speak of too, because at West Point and the service academies, it's actually beaten into us. And I think we're doing the service academies can really serve as really good models on how to do that right. They've changed a lot since I went through as a cadet, but it's at the central to what we do. As officers, and for better or for worse, if you go to West Point and you're in the Army, you're held to a higher standard. I have been on the good side and bad side of that in my military career. But it was something that I got from my time I was 18 to 22, but then I got no character development training when I was in the Army. And what I saw, another good version of this too, unfortunately, we put it in the hands of the wrong people. We put it in the hands of our chaplains, which I could see the connection between the spiritual domain and spirituality and character development. But they were charged, people of the cloth, or then who may or may not have the education to do that, were doing that. I did have two really awesome chaplains when I was at Fort Benning who did some really great character development training for our mid-career Army officers as well too. And it was all about, and it was getting out of the classroom and putting into action with scenarios, right? So putting yourself in these moral and ethical dilemmas to where there's no right or wrong answer, to where now you're forced to, in a safe environment with your peers and with the experienced police officers, to walk through and red team what this would look like if you encounter these situations. I don't know if we do that. I don't know we do. I know we don't do it. I know we don't build in character development into how we shoot, move, and communicate in the Army. So I'm wondering, tell me, Patrick, do we build ethical or moral and ethical decision making into our tactical training of police officers?
I don't know. And maybe, and I don't want to say that nobody's doing it, but I tell you where we try to do our best is when we're in that hiring process.
Yeah.
And what you describe as red team, which basically you're running through scenarios and you're challenging people on these ideas and concepts. What would you do? We have a very specific line of, and I don't know that every agency does this. I know that our agency did it where we're asking questions, and one, I hate to give away the sauce, right? And people at the agency will get mad at me if I give away some of the scenarios. But here's just a simple example of this, right? Okay, you're a patrol officer and you're out on patrol and you make a traffic stop and it's your mom and she was going 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. Are you going to write her a ticket? Yes. Right. So,
yeah,
and again, so now put yourself into, here I am, I'm a candidate. I'm thinking I want to be a police officer. And now I'm being asked this question. Am I going to write my mom a ticket? Right. Well,
yeah.
The quick answer in your mind is, well, of course not. I'm not writing my mom a ticket. But then again, well, your mom's speeding. Is your mom above the law? The law says, the speed limit's 35. She's going 50. So you immediately start testing the candidates or the applicants, their mental flexibility, right? Like, yeah. What is the legally correct answer? What is a morally correct answer? Yeah. What is a procedurally correct answer? Right. Policy. So, without really giving it away too much about where we go from there, that just kind of sets you up. But that's
right.
But, you do that early in a person's career. Now, we do training all the time, right? We train on policy and procedure, right. But we're not necessarily maybe doing that at a level of what you're talking about, where right. you put people in these situations. Now, I will say this. One of the advantages and one of the things about body-worn camera footage that is I call it an exponential learning tool, because what we saw, we'll just use the Memphis example, we'll stay there, is that now I do have an example of poor performance that's captured on video on display that I can show a group of young officers. I can show it to a group of experienced officers, and we can have a discussion about what went right, what went wrong, and what do we think led to these types of decisions. And
right.
So I guess in that aspect, yes, there is some great opportunities moving forward.
Right. Yeah, and I'd be kind of curious, like, hey, I know that debriefing and reporting and using case studies, I know that is already baked into training too, but I think, how do I then apply that to me? So in other words, so we have, and again, like when I first came in the Army, we didn't have the Army value system. The Army values are leadership, duty, respect, honor, integrity, and personal courage and self-service. Actually, I said that it's leadership, duty, respect, honor, integrity, and personal courage. I think self-service is in there somewhere too, so we'll edit that out. So it's, my point is that the Army values, when I in 2001, when they came out, ironically, when 9/11 happened, they said, we had a formation and for physical training, or maybe it was the beginning of the work day. And, for accountability, before you went to the motor pool and went to work or whatever. And so they gave us, I never forget, I got the dog tag, it had the acronym on it. And I got a card that had, the soldier's creed and with the warrior ethos built in. And they said, oh, you got to memorize this. Right. And it was mainly for the soldiers, because the soldiers needed to know that in order to be able to pass their next promotion board or whatever it was, And I was like, man, this is a really interesting way to inculcate a million person force on what your institutional values were. And I didn't really appreciate it until I was a basic training commander, and we had all these people, recruits coming off the street. And again, we're trying to meet the needs of the force. It's 2006 then. We're at the height of the war. The surge is happening. And again, like we've opened up the aperture, like people we've never let in, who now to meet the needs, like we were letting all kinds of people in from questionable backgrounds. I mean, I had a soldier who had like 6 misdemeanors. He didn't have a felony, but he sure as hell had 6 misdemeanors, right? So I literally had a criminal who was now a soldier, right? And so, I mean, I'm not saying that's the exception. It's probably not the norm, but what's interesting that I saw, it was all about putting those values and beliefs into action and then aligning it to who they were. So a lot of people think when they come in the military that we're breaking them down to build them up. That's bullshit. We're meeting them where they're at and aligning them with what they're doing. And it becomes who they are. Is that the case for everybody? And this is how you do it in basic training, right? So every day they're belting out the soldier's creed and the warrior ethos. And our drill sergeants that I had were brilliant at weaving in the Army values into, mentorship, just talking in the barracks or out of the range or whatever, but then talking about, hey, here's what this value looks like in action, and how do we hold each other accountable to this standard, and how does this affect what this looks like in action? And it was nothing that I did, but I got a chance to bear witness to this. Now, what they did after that, after they left us after 9 weeks, I have no idea. But I sure as hell know that strong foundation of taking their individual values and where they came up with. So they grew up in the mean streets of Detroit, or they were a country boy out in Iowa. It didn't freaking matter. They could have completely different value systems coming in, but then what they did, them wearing the uniform and having that commonality, aligned them to a set of values that they could connect to and could relate to. And then that was all about putting that into action. And I think this is not I know we're spending a lot of time doing this, and I have a great resource for everybody who's out there too. And he's working with law enforcement now here in Texas. His name is Dave Anderson. He's a West Point graduate like me. And he has Developing Leaders of Character. You can check him out. We'll put his website in the show notes. But he definitely is the expertise that has that. But so what? Why is the mental toughness guy talking about character? Well, because a lot of the character development research comes from psychology, right? And again, it's at the core of your identity. If you don't answer the question, "Who am I?" It's you're leaving behind and leaving to chance how important it is in terms of how you think and what you do.
So I think maybe the takeaway from this is like, because I think we're also good at that in law enforcement in terms of talking about what our core values are, what our mission is. You go into any police department, you'll see it hanging, probably somewhere in the entrance. It'll be displayed. I mean, we had our code and our creed hanging in our gym where everybody could read it. But it's one thing. I think it's one thing to memorize something and to teach it. It's another thing to integrate it into everything that you're doing in your training and in your review processes. Like, hey, how did your performance here, how did it align with what our core values are for the organization? I think that's probably the big takeaway is how do we build that into the culture of the organization? And who's doing it well?
Yeah, and I think, and that's great to hear too. But I think really when it comes down to the true stress test is when you're in that moment to where now you're with a group of people who are escalating. They're thinking with they're allowing their emotions to control their behaviors, and that's ramping up and escalating a situation that's going to inevitably lead to bad outcomes. Who has the courage to then stand up and and be the voice of reason and say, hold on here, and step in and influence that situation, right? And that's what control is all about. That's the next C, is control is has two factors to that too. One is life control, one is emotional control. But control is all this idea that someone with a high level of what's called a locus control, or has what's called a high agency, believes that their attitudes and behaviors determine their fate and what happens to them, and that they in other words control their fate and their destiny, right? Where somebody who has locus control probably thinks, tends to have an avoidance approach to life and believes that, tends to have a victimhood and tends to avoid situations, because of fear of failure or, perfection or whatever it is too. So understanding what you can control, what you can't control, your grip and gravity forces are really important, including how you influence others and understanding what your span of control is. So going back to the episode there too, it's like, okay, well, in that situation, what do I control? What do I not control? Well, automatically, it's like I only control how I think and how I act and react. That's it. And I barely control that because the majority of my unconscious thoughts, which are up to 66,000 independent thoughts a day, only 10% of those you control in your conscious mind and your prefrontal cortex, right? And you're also experiencing the emotions in real time, right? I'm pissed off. Like, this asshole just tried to attack me multiple times. He's high as a kite and he's not stopping. And I'm like doing everything I can in my kit to keep this dude down, or now he's attacking my buddies, and oh, hell no, right? And so now you're in the situation. It's like, okay, at some point in time, how do I influence others through my body language? 55% of how we communicate effectively when it comes to building trust in extremists, especially in extremists, it has to do with body language. Tone and tempo matters a lot too. And then only 7% of what we say is in our voice. But what do we focus on? We tend to focus in on the things we can't control and that we barely influence. And so we wonder why things get out of control so quickly, right? But again, this isn't something you can practice in that moment from a control perspective and influence perspective and expect to get optimal outcomes, because your training should have been done, in a much higher situation where you've created it volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous situations in training. So that by the time you get in that situation, it now is a status quo thing, because I've seen this before. And again, it's easier said than done. And I get it because I've been in combat, I've been in firefights, and I can't replicate a firefight at home station. I get it, right? But you can increase the stress level in training to where it is increasing the likelihood that I am now defaulting to the neural pathways that I've set by training my brain and my behaviors in a tactical and technical scenario that is similar to, if not equal to, the difficulty of the Memphis situation.
Yeah. So Colonel Dave Grossman, he wrote several books, but one that's very popular in the law enforcement circles. He wrote the book On Combat and On Killing. And he gives some pretty visceral examples of the power of the mind and expectations. And this is probably 20 years ago, the first time I heard this, if not longer, where he talked about where people were dying from gunshot wounds that should have been survivable, just because the mind had convinced them, from what they'd seen and what they've been programmed to believe, like, if I get shot, I'm going to die. Like, I get shot, I'm supposed to flip over backwards. And, in real life, that doesn't happen, right? Unless somebody has convinced themselves that's what they're supposed to do. And
that's right.
So, I mean, I think the next evolution of really what he was trying to get at is really where you're coming from. Is there is a way, he calls it stress inoculation, which is important. I think, it's one thing to understand what all right, I know I'm going to get hit with a simunition round, or I might get hit with a simunition round in this training exercise. So that's ramping up my cortisol and my stress response. And I think really where the next level is okay, well, if we understand these kind of basic elements, we really need to understand it, we need to spend more time getting under the hood to figure out, okay, well, why is that? And then how do we best prepare ourselves for the physiological response? And how does this affect us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but from a job perspective, how is it going to impact potential performance under stress?
Yep. Yeah. And what Grossman means, and I love stress inoculation too, and I borrowed that from him, is what the science of it is actually called exposure therapy, right?
Okay.
And essentially where you're micro dosing it too, right? But again, what you want to do is you want to get beyond the threshold, right? To see how your individual officers and how how groups of officers who are all different individuals in terms of who they are, how do they react in certain types of situations, right? And again, that is really revealing. And I think everybody has to go there to where you're now beyond your limits. Like I've got a temper, right? And like I can go from 0 to 80 like really, really quick, right? To where I can lose my composure. And as a young officer, like I really struggle with that. I didn't have any tools to really go to, right? And I kind of got away with it. And so it became a bad habit. And so it's something that's like, all right, well, how am I in this moment to where I can now, learn things like acceptance and commitment training, toward using a simple exercise, like I call it ADC, right? And so that's, hey, I'm in the moment. How do I pause, take a breath, which helps, down regulate myself? How do I then accept my thoughts and my emotions? Like, what's in my physiology? What are the signals that my body's telling me based on what I'm interpreting about this a-hole that's completely high as a kite and now he's attacking me and my buddies, right? And now everybody's escalating and everybody's, heart rate is way up. The situation is now at a precipice to where at a tipping point where it can go with the other. So now how do I take a step back, observe my thoughts and my emotions in the moment, and then I'm down regulating. And then how do I detach myself from it in that moment in a way that allows me to commit to more productive thinking, more productive self-talk, more productive affirmations that allow me to take the next best step, and then in that moment. And so that ADC process, there's another one, it's called PONO, pause, observe, get to neutral, and then act. Like those are things that you should be practicing at home when you're dealing with your kids when they don't want to go to sleep or eat their vegetables. Those are things that when I'm in traffic and, some jackass is is on there texting at a stoplight and we miss a green light and I'm laying on my horn. You know what I'm saying? I mean, these are the moments to where I can practice these things, so, and then again, by seeking the discomfort and the stress, which is not good or bad, through my training, not just when I'm at work, but when I'm at home too. That's the great thing about mental skills training is that I don't need to be, at work to practice it. I can practice it 24/7, 365, even when I sleep, because exactly what you talked about earlier is that my brain is now resetting, and again, my neural pathways that I have established through the way that I think and I act now I've restructured, and then I get another opportunity the next day, right? So if I've recovered properly, I've strengthened my brain just like I strengthened my body.
So that's why these things are all interconnected and all interrelated. So, when I hear you say that, it just, I think of Viktor Frankl, right? And Man's Search for Meaning. He calls that the stimulus gap, right? In that moment where you as an individual, you get to decide, like, and if you can, I think that ADC protocol, I think is just an amazing way to kind of reinforce that and teach it. Like here is a practical skill that this is something that I can do, and I can improve my ability to be able to create that stimulus gap, because without it, right, that's when we all get sucked in.
Yeah. Well, and I think from a larger system standpoint too, that the way that the court of public opinion, for better or for worse, and the way that the system works, and again, this is true of the military as in law enforcement, is that everything is looked at with a microscope, and what's happening is it turns into this, now we're really reaching, because when a very small population doesn't do the right thing or they make a mistake, which we're human beings, I mean, we're all human beings, right?
Right.
And we've all undermined our character. We've all lied, cheated, and stealed. We've all let the pressure and stress get the best of us, where we've reacted versus responded. I mean, we do that all the time, right? And so, but now there's this pressure cooker to where you have younger people who are less experienced, who, whose brains aren't fully cooked, and now they're under a microscope, right? And then, and we automatically assume that we investigate the hell out of everything. And now all of a sudden, like, you were guilty before you even get a chance to prove otherwise, right? And so we treat everything with has critical and dire consequences versus allowing people to have the psychological safety to make mistakes, right? And I don't know what that looks like in law enforcement. I'm excited to learn about it, but I know my experience in the military, the higher that I got, the more I got investigated, right? And it was because a lot was expected of me because I had a lot more responsibility. But I look at a more modern example, of someone being under the microscope and the system failing this individual was Major General Patrick Donahue, who made national news. He retired, and his retirement was delayed because he was going. There was, some journalists made, some disparaging comments about female soldiers, and he immediately got onto Twitter and he essentially got in, a Twitter battle with, different people, including some people who were under his command, right? And so he clearly misstepped. He should have thought before he hit send, right? So that was a mistake, but it got escalated so high and turned into this, it turned this black eye and an otherwise amazing career of an Army officer who gave his life towards doing this thing, right? And it's like, well, why the hell is that? How is our system built in to where, for people who are uniforms, you're automatically guilty until you're proven innocent, in a country that's in a judicial system that you guys are protecting and military people are protecting that suggests otherwise. It's very contrarian to me, but I think that the way the societal lens is in law enforcement is now creating this self-fulfilling prophecy to where who the hell wants to be a cop now? Who the hell wants to be a cop? I wouldn't want to be a cop. I've got 3 sons and a daughter. I would not tell them to be a police officer right now because the world does not see them as a noble profession. And that's a damn shame, because it is.
And, and that's one of the biggest things that we're facing right now is that, this is a major factor that's contributing to the recruitment issue. It's a major factor that's driving our retention issues. And it's easy to get upset about this and kind of get doom and gloom. And there's been a part of me that has been, preaching from the mountaintop since the post-Ferguson days, because if the Ferguson example is I think is very telling, because in that case, Officer Darren Wilson was acquitted, right? It was proved that he acted within policy. He didn't do anything illegal. He was justified in his actions. 3 separate grand jury investigations all came to the same conclusion. And for people that are not in law enforcement, they may not recognize kind of the monumental importance of that. Sometimes it's difficult to get 1 grand jury, let alone 2, and now you have 3, and they all came to the same conclusion. But if you ask the average American today about Michael Brown, there's still a large percentage of the population that feels, that thinks that he got his shot in the back with his hands up.
Yeah, for sure.
And which is not true. And that that's kind of the cascading effects of social media and things that can happen. Now, the problem is then you have something like that happens in Minneapolis, where you have very poor performance. And even though you have Derek Chauvin, who has to be accountable for his actions there as a police officer, it's George Floyd, had he contributed to what happened there. He's not innocent in what led to the effects of that arrest, but what happened there shouldn't have happened, right? Because now you've got an officer that there in that case, there was several young officers that were around that quite frankly, just like what you're talking about, they haven't even had the chance to build that experience yet. But the expectation for them is, it doesn't matter if it's on day 1, day 20, or, in your 20th year, right is right, wrong is wrong. And you have a, not just a moral obligation, but you have a duty to protect. And
Yeah.
So a lot of awareness, came from that case. So there's always, I think, positives that can come from these really, really bad situations. And for Tyree Nichols in Memphis, it's tragic what happened to him, and it shouldn't have happened. But yet again, inside of law enforcement, we have to really, the big question is like, are we really going to learn from this example? Are we going to do the deep dive that we have to, and to understand what's driving this type of activity? And what you just talked about a minute ago is why I get so passionate about this, because if you don't have people with high character and high integrity that are willing to put themselves out on the line to come into this profession, then you're in trouble from Jump Street. It's going to go from bad to worse. If you have good people, and then we can find the courage in this country to invest, not defund. Defund is the complete wrong answer for so many different reasons. That's why I just that's one of the things that's so discouraging when you hear people talk about, like, you cannot defund and improve performance at the same time. It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. I would say, like, hey, instead of the next freaking taser, how about we invest into training their character and how they think? Like, I mean, what's going to save more lives and lead to better outcomes? I mean, is it the human or the hardware, right? Because we're asking our professionals in uniform to operate in the gray every day and make black and white decisions. They're not robots, and I'd encourage people, it's something that's really, as a case study, and I hope it someday will be a case study for all U.S. Special Operations, but I encourage everybody to watch out there too. It's a documentary that's really going to get you to think about how complex it is to operate in the gray area, both in combat, and on the street. It's about, everybody's probably heard about the now retired Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, and on trial. And there's a great episode, I don't know if you've seen it, it's called The Line. Have you seen this? It's produced by Apple. It's a documentary and a podcast series. And I'd really encourage everyone, who's to go look at that, right? Because it really brings a lot of things into question, and it really gets you to think about what is it that we're asking our people to go do, and how does that, lead to our expectations in terms of, when they do make the right decisions and when they make the wrong decisions, in those type of situations, right? And what do we do when we're in the moment as a bystander, or if we're in the moment as the person who's actioning something, right? And so it's not cut and dry. It really isn't. And so I think we need to start to take a hard look at that, because it's not like, if we spent millions of dollars into mental skills training, kind of like the U.S. military did, they spent over $500 million on resilience training, and it did not, and they did it because they were trying to get right of bang. It was a knee-jerk reaction to people killing themselves. And it was trying to be end all be all and end all negative behaviors. That was like aiming to not to hit the target, but to not miss. Why are we aiming to not miss? So, like, the premise behind what we're doing is not to prevent Ferguson, Missouri, and to prevent what's happening in Memphis and so on and so forth, right? That's not the reason, right? We want optimal outcomes, and we want to make better human beings because they're police officers. That's what we're trying to do, who are better citizens and leaders in our communities to help protect and serve. How do you measure that? I don't know, but, like, I will tell you that, it's worth doing, and it's going to take some time. It's going to take as much of a cultural shift as it is anything else too. But the amazing thing is that behavioral science is at a point now to where it's time. And my challenge is, if you're out there, who's going to be the pioneer who's willing to invest in this and figure out a way, and to develop, the case study that now then becomes the copycat that they're starts to multiply from a grassroots level too, because they ain't going to come from top down. Nobody's coming. Expect a self-rescue, guys. So, again, I'm going on my soapbox here too, but I just feel that, and I know, unfortunately, I got to go here, but, I just really feel like this is necessary, it's timely, and it's needed now more than ever.
So I really appreciate that. I think we've set this up nice for some follow-on discussions. The answer, and I don't want to end on a negative note, and I don't think you do either, and I don't think that's where we were going with this conversation. I just want people, the listeners, to understand, like, look, it's time. We can't keep watching these repeated poor performances and things like that happen in Memphis. And then there's another one. Oh my gosh, I just watched it this morning. Yeah, a little bit different scenario in Huntington Beach, California, where an officer, where a person that has, he's a double amputee, he has a knife and he gets shot. Maybe we'll save that one for later. But that one it creates a whole nother list of interesting discussion topics. But at the core of all this, just like you said, is the human brain.
Yeah.
And it is driving all of the decisions about which equipment to use, when to use it, the proper context in which to use it. So you need to have tasers, you need to have mace, you need to have batons, you need to have less lethal impact rounds, you need to have lethal rounds, you need this whole cadre of equipment that you need to carry, but you need to know what to use and when to use it and how to use it and how to best apply each tool to get the job done. And the only way you do that is if you have a very well-centered, highly trained, emotionally regulated human being that's properly prepared. That it's the only way. You're never going to buy the right piece of equipment is never going to get you there. The best software is never going to get you there. But you combine all of those things, and now we're talking, and that's going to cost a shitload of money, and people need to get ready to pony up. Or we and again, my concern is the next couple of years. I think things are going to get a little bit worse before they get better. Because we don't have the people coming that we need, and like you said, there is a lot of self-rescuing going on in agencies right now.
Yeah, and like I said, that for every challenge there's an opportunity in disguise, right? And I think I'm really optimistic because I feel like in all the populations that I work with this generation, people would bash millennials and stuff like that. And those were the people that I served with, and I was a millennial defender for a lot of times because they volunteered to join a wartime army and I didn't, and I never forgot that. And man, the same thing for those, our kids, Generation Z, who's raising the right hand to go serve our community, our country, man, hats off to them, because if they're deciding to do that, they have more courage than I did, as a combat veteran and all the things that I've done. Because it's harder than ever to do that job. And the good news is this generation, because they went through the pandemic, as kids, they realize, man, I need to find balance in my life. And the most important 6 inches in policing is between my ears. And there's no separation between me and when I'm putting the uniform on. I'm the same person. And so I need to figure out how to be able to do what I need to do to get by and be the best version of myself. And I think they are open to mental training more than anything. I'm really encouraged by it. I think the generation of leaders who are leading this organization are also open to it. The dinosaurs are starting to die out. They're still out there. The old school cops, the old school military folks, the old school coaches, they're still out there. And there's still 10% of the population you're never going to reach. But I'd be willing to argue that there's 10% who are champions that are out there. And if you're listening to you, we need to hear your voice, and you need to stand up and, be a champion for this at the grassroots level. And I think, but 80% of the people are on the fence. They're just not sure. And so we got to be, if you want to roll this out, I'd love to be able to help you with that and work with you, because I want to learn about what this needs to look like, and bring some best practices from other arenas, in terms of what works and what doesn't, so we can be very deliberate and very intentional about it, because you really only get one chance to get it right. but that time is now.
So how do you if for listeners, how they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're interested in learning more.
Yes, absolutely. And I know we didn't get a chance to talk about it too, but I'll mention my book, Deliberate Discomfort. You can check that out on Amazon. It's a 2-time bestseller. I'm really proud of that project. Thanks, Pat, for reading it. And
for the viewers on YouTube, I'm showing it right now, and with all my tabs and my notes and all my writing in the margin that I didn't quite get to. I'm excited to, but I am excited to break it down. And I'm going to give a quick plug to this because, especially for the leaders that are out there. And I apologize. I know we got to get done here, but the whole book, first of all, the first chapter, where you break it down, the layout of the book is very unique. It starts with the story about, a soldier and their experiences in combat. And then you have the mental performance coaches that break it down afterwards, that kind of dissect what was going on. And it really, every chapter has some brilliant takeaways. As a leader, and Major Pettit, who's now, I think, is retired. Did he retire as a full bird or?
Yeah. Brian Pettit, Colonel Pettit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because he's got a line in here that he says, in the end, it's, trying to, mentor and coach a young leader about how to lead and make decisions. And he says, no one but you is going to know what's right or wrong in the 100 decisions that you make in a day. For this company to succeed, you must go forward and apply the best judgment in every situation. And that line then gets addressed by both the performance coaches that dissect that chapter. And for me, that really resonated with me. And this is again why I think it's so important for law enforcement leaders to take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. Because there is that saying, it is lonely at the top, and it can be very difficult, and those pressures can add up, and sometimes there is the element of confidence that comes to play, where do you feel like you're making the right decisions, and how do you really know?
Right.
And so awesome book.
No, I appreciate that. So go ahead and check that out as well too. You can follow me on social media. I'm going to include my link tree, which has all my links to social media. My Kung Fu on social media, I guess, is the strongest on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. I post, multiple times a week, in terms of my blogs, videos. Speaking of videos, you can follow my YouTube page. Also, my company's called Design to Perform. I've got a website coming out real soon. That's www.design, spelled out, perform.org. And so that's coming out pretty soon too. You can also reach me on Instagram. I have a Design to Perform, and it's a Coach_Riise. I'm on Twitter. My company's not as strong there as well, but definitely check us out. Please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. To answer any questions or comments, you can DM me. You can email at andy@designtoperform.org. That's my personal email. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, either myself or my assistant. And again, if you're interested in me coming out and speaking to your department or to your organization on anything I talked about, whether it's mental toughness, mental fitness, why mental sensitivity is a superpower, I'd love to be able to do that. I also do workshops, team building events. I do one-on-one and small group coaching, virtually and in person. And pretty soon here, through my joint venture called Mental Mastery, I'm going to have a lot of high quality content, mental skills training content that is, uses videos, audio, it's gamified. It has quizzes, it has activities built into that. And then we'll have a mobile and LMS delivery platforms for that as well too. And that's going to help scale organizations, because again, good products with people behind them scale, people don't. And that's what we're trying to do, is democratize mental fitness training. We believe everybody deserves to get the most out of what they have to be at the best when it matters the most, especially our police officers that are out there.
Mental Mastery #3, the 4C model of mental toughness. That's on your YouTube channel. And
yes, sir.
We were talking about that. So it's a great, And I know for people that are just listening when they're in their car or on a run for whatever, you can't see the YouTube channel. So I would really encourage people to jump on your YouTube channel and check that out. You give a great breakdown. And I think once people hear that and see that, it'll make a lot of sense. One of the things I didn't get to cover today, and one thing I'm really curious about. So in the Dragunov chapter, there is the acronym EDSOC. And how does this? So my question is like, does EDSOC integrate with the 4C model in the wheel? So when you start talking about endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, cortisol, we're gonna have to save it for the next episode. But
it's all baked in. Yeah, it's all baked into that, and I include a little bit of on my long courses. I always include a lot of functional neuroscience and neuropsychology. So it's understanding how your brain works is incredibly important, and so without geeking out too much, it's all about functionality, understanding how my brain works. So, what I can control and can't control in that situation. Right.
Absolutely. And you are wearing a Team RWB shirt.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an ambassador, Team Red, White, and Blue. And I do a bunch of different things, but with them advising the leadership group, but I'm really encourage anybody who's out there in law enforcement, or even if you're retired, it's not just veterans. Our job's to enrich veterans' lives, and by meeting them wherever they're at on their health, wellness, and fitness journey, and helping them, we believe that their best days are to come. So it's just a great community that helps with mental, physical, social, and spiritual wellness and fitness. And I think veterans, especially in law enforcement, are a unique tribe and of themselves too. And this is just a great opportunity for us to be able to then support you. So please sign up, download our app, check that out as well too. Connect with your local chapter. They're all volunteers. There's lots of great events that are happening, even some pretty awesome outdoor adventures that you could sign up for that you could do for at a really low cost or almost for free. So just be sure to check us out and support us.
And for listeners, by the time this episode airs, you'll have heard the episode with Michael Irwin. And I didn't know that Andy and Michael knew each other. Andy has the Team RWB shirt on, so very cool connection. And he wrote the book Lead Yourself First. We kind of integrated some of that discussion here. Yep. And I think the overall theme is we're all moving, I think, in the right direction. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm really excited and really just really humbled that people with your skill set and your knowledge and your experience are willing to come help us in the law enforcement space. And I know there's always a lot that we can learn from each other. And I really appreciate your time and your willingness to come on and share your experiences with us.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And I'm really glad that we got connected through Eric, and shout out to him, and whose episode was great. I know we mentioned that before, but thank you for creating this forum to talk about how to optimize the human weapon system, right? And not only for our time we're in uniform, but for our entire lives. And I think what you're doing is really progressive and needed. And I'm really looking forward to not only being back, but also to also help find other experts that people can learn from and refer them to, because I think this is just an awesome opportunity. So I want to encourage you to keep going.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's kind of cool since I started putting this stuff out there, along the way, I always kind of found people along the way that, were like-minded and have these similar ideas, but sometimes you feel like you're shouting into the void. But now some of those voices are coming back, and it's been really fun to see. And I think we're at the precipice right now for a lot of big positive changes in law enforcement. So thank you, Andy Riise, for being a guest today on the Coptimizer Podcast. And until next time, I'm 1042.
See you in the arena.
Log into www.performance-protocol and learn more about how to bring this program to your agency and community.